Welcome back to another episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, your go-to source for staying sharp in a fast-moving world of manufacturing, packaging, coding, and beyond. If you've been with us for a while, you already know the drill, but if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. We break down the stories shaping our industry so you can stay ahead of the curve without having to dig through the noise. I'm your host, Alexa, and today we'll discuss topics ranging from the Trump administration's lawsuit against California over egg prices and animal welfare laws to the challenges facing U.S. manufacturing under former President Biden's subsidies and President Trump's tariffs. We'll also dive into the newly announced 30% tariff on goods from the European Union and Mexico, the U.S. government's 17% duty on fresh Mexican tomatoes, and the broader implications of these trade policies on global markets and American consumers. Let's get started. In a move that could reshape breakfast tables across North America, Ferrero, the Italian confectioner behind brands like Nutella and Kinder, has announced its plan to acquire WK Kellogg for $3.1 billion. Founded in 1906 in Battle Creek, Michigan, WK Kellogg is known for creating iconic cereals like Corn Flakes, Fruit Loops, and Frosted Flakes. The acquisition includes 6 manufacturing plants and the marketing and distribution rights for Kellogg cereals across the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean. Ferrero will pay $23 per Kellogg share as part of its strategy to expand its North American footprint. This follows Ferrero's earlier acquisition of Nestlé's U.S. candy brands in 2018 and Wells Enterprises, the maker of Blue Bunny ice cream, in 2022. However, the road ahead presents challenges. U.S. cereal consumption has been steadily declining as consumers shift to protein bars and shakes. Cold cereal sales dropped by 6% in 2025 compared to 2022, and Kellogg's net sales fell 2% to $2.7 billion in 2024. The company has also faced hurdles like a worker strike in 2021 and public demands to remove artificial dyes from its products. To address these concerns, Kellogg has begun reformulating its cereals for schools, removing artificial dyes, and pledging to exclude them from all new products starting in January. These efforts aim to align with evolving consumer preferences and rebuild trust. Despite these challenges, Ferrero sees significant potential in this acquisition. Kellogg's extensive distribution network and strong relationships with grocery chains offer Ferrero a unique opportunity to negotiate better pricing and positioning for its products. Additionally, this move allows Ferrero to diversify beyond snacks and sweets into the breakfast meal category. While the deal is expected to close in the second half of the year, pending shareholder approval, questions remain about the future of Kellogg's iconic brands. Will Ferrero preserve the legacy of these household names, or will it make tough decisions to streamline operations? This acquisition marks a new chapter in the story of two global food giants. The Trump administration has filed a lawsuit against California challenging the state's animal welfare laws that require all eggs sold within its borders to come from cage-free hens. These laws, passed through the voter initiatives in 2008 and 2018, are being blamed by the administration for contributing to soaring egg prices. The lawsuit argues that California's regulations impose undue burdens on egg producers nationwide, given the state's significant influence on the national economy. The administration claims that these laws violate the U.S. Constitution by affecting interstate commerce and asserts that regulating egg production should fall under federal jurisdiction. U.S. Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rowland stated that the lawsuit is a stand against California's overreach, emphasizing the need to protect American families from what she described as oppressive regulatory burdens. Egg prices have indeed seen dramatic fluctuations, with the average price for a dozen grade A eggs reaching a record of $6.23 of March of 2025 before declining to $4.55 in May. While the Trump administration attributes the price drop to its economic policies, experts point to the seasonal factors and the impact of avian influenza, which has led to the culling of nearly 175 million birds since 2022. California officials, however, have pushed back, arguing that the state's animal welfare laws are not to blame for high egg prices. They highlight that avian influenza and other market dynamics have played a more significant role. The Humane World for Animals, formerly the Humane Society of the United States, also defended the regulations, stating that much of the egg industry has already transitioned to cage-free practices due to consumer demand. The lawsuit has sparked a broader debate about the balance between state-level regulation and federal oversight, as well as the economic and ethical implications of animal welfare standards. While the case unfolds, the American Egg Board has expressed its commitment to complying with California's laws while supporting farmers and stabilizing the egg supply and meeting consumer demand. The U.S. manufacturing sector is grappling with significant challenges despite government efforts to bolster the industry through subsidies and tariffs. Over the past 3 years, manufacturing activity has stagnated, with employment and production levels struggling to recover from the pandemic's economic disruptions. Former President Joe Biden's administration introduced subsidies to boost semiconductor and clean energy production, triggering a factory-building boom. Between April of 2021 and October of 2024, investment in manufacturing facilities more than tripled. However, this momentum has faded as President Trump, in collaboration with Congress, ended these subsidies and shifted focus to protectionist trade policies. These policies include tariffs such as a 50% tax on steel and aluminum, 25% on autos and auto parts, and 10% on various other imports. While tariffs aim to give U.S. factories a competitive edge, they have also driven up costs for manufacturers who rely on imported materials. For instance, U.S.-made steel now costs $960 per metric ton, more than double the global export price of $440, according to Steel Benchmarker. Eric Hajopian, CEO of Pilot Precision Products, explained that his company continues to source steel from Austria and France despite the tariffs, as domestic prices remain prohibitively high. The uncertainty surrounding tariff policies has further complicated the situation. Frequent changes and delays in implementation have left manufacturers hesitant to make long-term investments or hiring decisions. Customers do not want to make commitments in the wake of massive tariff uncertainty, reported a fabricated metal products company in the Institute for Supply Management survey known as ISM. Similarly, a computer and electronics firm noted, the situation remains too volatile to firmly put such plans into place. The manufacturing sector's struggle are also tied to broader economic factors. Inflation, driven by a strong post-pandemic recovery, has increased operational costs, while the Federal Reserve's 11 interest rate hikes in 2022 and 2023 have made borrowing more expensive. As a result, manufacturing employment has declined for 3 consecutive years, with 7,000 jobs lost in June of 2025 alone. The ISM reported that U.S. factories have been in decline for 30 of the 32 months since October of 2022, with manufacturing activity shrinking for the 4th straight month in June of 2025. Despite these challenges, some industry leaders remain cautiously optimistic. Chris Zuzik, vice president of Vokesha Metal Products, highlighted a potential benefit of tariffs. When you throw the tariff on, it gets us closer to competing with lower-priced foreign companies. However, he acknowledged that the overall environment remains challenging, with many manufacturers just waiting for the new normal. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, offered a sobering outlook. Manufacturing production will continue to flatline. If production is flat, that suggests manufacturing employment will continue to slide. Manufacturing is likely to suffer a recession in the coming year. Jared Bernstein, chair of Biden's White House Council of Economic Advisors, reflected on the sector's journey. It's a long, strange trip to get back to where we started. As of June 2025, factory payroll stood at $12.75 million, nearly identical to February of 2020 levels before the pandemic hit. For now, manufacturers are adopting a cautious approach, delaying major decisions until there is more clarity on trade policies and economic conditions. Hajopian at Pilot Precision remains hopeful, stating there may be light at the end of the tunnel that may not be a locomotive bearing down. However, the path forward for the U.S. manufacturing remains fraught with uncertainty. Should I redo that?
You kind of fell off at the end.
Okay. Hajopian at Pilot Precision remains hopeful, stating, there may be light at the end of the tunnel that may not be a locomotive bearing down. However, the path forward for U.S. manufacturing remains fraught with uncertainty. President Donald Trump has announced plans to impose 30% tariffs on goods from the European Union and Mexico starting August 1st of 2025. This decision, outlined in letters posted to his social media account, is part of a broader strategy to address what Trump describes as long-standing trade imbalance and to revive the U.S. economy. The move has sparked significant concern among global trade partners, as the EU and Mexico are 2 of the United States' largest trading partners. In his letter to Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, Trump acknowledged Mexico's efforts to curb undocumented migration and fentanyl trafficking, but criticized the country for not doing enough. Mexico has been helping me secure the border, but what Mexico has done is not enough, Trump wrote, accusing the nation of allowing North America to become a narco-trafficking playground. In a separate letter to the European Union, Trump labeled the U.S. trade deficit with the EU a national security threat. He criticized the bloc's tariff and non-tariff policies and trade barriers, which he claimed have created a non-reciprocal trading relationship. Trump warned that further tariff increases could follow if EU retaliates with its own measures. The announcement comes after months of uncertainty surrounding U.S. trade policy. In April, Trump imposed tariffs on dozens of countries but paused their implementation for 90 days to allow for negotiations. As the grace period ended, Trump began issuing tariff letters to various nations, though he has delayed the start date for some tariffs to August 1st. The potential impact of these tariffs is vast. In 2024, trade between the U.S. and the EU was valued at £1.7 trillion or $2 trillion, averaging £4.6 billion or $5.4 billion per day. The EU's largest exports to the U.S. include pharmaceuticals, cars, aircrafts, chemicals, medical instruments, and wine. Lamberto Frescobaldi, president of the Union of Italian Wines Trade Association, warned that the tariffs could lead to a virtual embargo on Italian wine, describing the announcement as the darkest chapter in relations between two historic Western allies. European leaders have expressed strong opposition to the tariffs. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen emphasized the EU's commitment to dialogue but warned of proportionate countermeasures if necessary. French President Emmanuel Macron called for European unity, stating that the EU must resolutely defend European interests. Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni and Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen criticized the move as short-sighted, while Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson cautioned that everyone loses out from an escalated trade conflict. Mexico has also voiced its disapproval during high-level talks with U.S. State Department officials. Mexican representatives described the tariffs as unfair treatment. President Sheinbaum, while refraining from direct criticism, expressed confidence that the two nations could negotiate better terms, emphasizing the need for a cool head in addressing the issue. The tariffs could disrupt decades of global trade norms established under the Uruguay Round Agreement. The tariffs could disrupt decades of global trade norms established under the Uruguay Round Agreements, which set consistent tariff rates and promoted the most favored nation principle. Trump's approach, which includes targeting specific countries with varying tariff rates, has upended these rules. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent defended the strategy, urging other nations to engage in earnest good faith negotiations to resolve trade imbalances. Critics argue that the tariffs could harm U.S. consumers and businesses. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, president of the American Action Forum, noted that many nations are now focusing on minimizing their exposure to the U.S. economy rather than engaging in meaningful trade talks. They're spending time talking to each other about what the future is going to look like, and we're left out, he said. If implemented, the tariffs could replace existing 25% duties on Mexican goods and do not comply with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement known as USMCA. However, Trump's letter did not clarify whether USMCA-compliant goods would remain exempt. The administration has also threatened a 35% tariff hike on Canadian goods. As the August 1st deadline approaches, the global trade community is bracing for potential upheaval. With the EU and Mexico preparing countermeasures and U.S. businesses expressing concerns about rising costs, the long-term implications of Trump's tariff strategy remain uncertain. The U.S. government has imposed a 17% duty on most fresh Mexican tomatoes, a move aimed at revitalizing the domestic tomato industry, but one that is expected to raise prices for American consumers. The decision follows the collapse of negotiations to renew the tomato suspension agreement, a deal first established in 2019 to address allegations of unfair trade practices by Mexico. Mexico currently supplies approximately 70% of the U.S. tomato market, a significant increase from 30% 2 decades ago, according to the Florida Tomato Exchange. Proponents of the tariff, such as Robert Gunther, executive vice president of the trade group, held the decision as an enormous victory for American tomato farmers and American agriculture. The tariff is intended to protect U.S. growers from what the Commerce Department describes as unfair trade practices that undercut pricing on produce like tomatoes. However, critics will argue that the duty will disproportionately impact American consumers. Tim Richards, a professor at Arizona State University Morrison School of Agribusiness, estimates that U.S. retail prices for tomatoes could rise by 8.5% on average, with some regions experiencing increases as high as 10%. Jacob Jensen, a trade policy analyst at the American Action Forum, noted that areas heavily reliant on Mexican tomatoes would face the steepest price hikes, while other regions might see increases closer to 6%. Lance Jugenmeyer, president of the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas, expressed disappointment, stating, "As an industry, we are saddened that American consumers will have to pay a tomato tax or duty for a reduced selection of the tomatoes they prefer, such as tomatoes on the vine, grape tomatoes, Romas, cocktail tomatoes, and other special varieties." The Mexican government has also criticized the tariff. Economic Secretary Marcelo Ebrard described the move as unfair and harmful to both Mexican producers and the American industry. The ground that Mexican fresh tomatoes have gained in the U.S. is because of the quality of the product, not from unfair practices, Ebrard said. Mexican greenhouses, which specialize in vine-ripe tomatoes, are seen as a key competitor to Florida's field-grown green-picked tomatoes. The tariff stems from long-standing U.S. complaints about Mexico's tomato exports. The 2019 Tomato Suspension Agreement required Mexico to sell its tomatoes at a minimum price and adhere to specific rules. However, the Commerce Department announced in April of 2025 that it was withdrawing from the agreement, citing overwhelming feedback from U.S. tomato growers seeking stronger protections. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick stated, "Mexico remains one of our greatest allies, but for far too long our farmers have been crushed by unfair trade practices that ends today." The decision has drawn criticism from various sectors, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and National Restaurant Association. In a letter to the Commerce Department, the Chamber and 30 other business groups warned that the tariff could lead to retaliatory actions from Mexico, potentially affecting other commodities and crops. The letter also highlighted the economic impacts of Mexican tomato imports, which supports 50,000 U.S. jobs and generates $8.3 billion in economic benefits. Governors from border states, including Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs, have also voiced opposition to the tariff. They urged the Commerce Department to maintain the existing agreement, citing concerns about trade uncertainty and its impact on local economies. As the tariff takes effect, the U.S. tomato industry faces a complex landscape. While the duty aims to protect domestic growers, it also raises questions about the balance between supporting American agriculture and ensuring affordable, diverse produce options for consumers. This episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update is proudly sponsored by our SNEED-Pack Small Box Auto Flat Folding Case Sealer, known as our CS30AF. Take your packaging efficiency to the next level with a machine that seals up to 20 boxes per minute using stainless steel rollers and air-tack cylinder-controlled folding mechanisms to ensure seamless operation. By automating tedious tasks like flat folding and sealing, it eliminates manual labor and reduces errors. Simplify your packaging process today with the SNEED-Pack CS30AF. Like always, stay tuned for our next episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell down below to stay up to date with all of our great content, and let us know what topics you'd like to see us talk about here on the show. We look forward to hearing from you all. Bye, everyone.